Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When I bought 4 acres of desert land outside an elite HOA's reach, I thought I was building a dream home. Instead, I started a war. One woman, one wall, and 10 inches of arrogance turned my quiet project into a battle of wills, laws, and mirrored revenge. When I bought the land, I knew exactly what I was doing. 4 acres of dusty, sun-baked earth on the edge of Mesa Cielo Vista, an elite HOA community with Tuscan roofs, manicured cacti, and security cameras that outnumbered hummingbirds. But I wasn't buying into that world. My property sat precisely outside their jurisdiction, like a sovereign microstate next to a totalitarian regime. I'd walked the boundary line with a GPS unit, 3 different maps, and a land use attorney before I ever signed the deed. I didn't want a backyard. I wanted freedom. The parcel had been sitting idle for years. No sewer, no fence, just a for sale sign leaning at a 30-degree angle like it had given up. But to me, it was a blank canvas. As a former municipal land use council turned architect, I'd spent over a decade helping developers navigate zoning hell. Now I was building my own home, one I designed myself to be off-grid capable, solar dominant, water efficient, and sharp as hell in its geometry. Clean lines, black steel, no stucco in sight. Construction started quietly. I hired a small crew I trusted. No flashy trucks, no boomboxes. We broke ground on a Tuesday morning just before the monsoons. The concrete was poured within a week. Framing rose like ribs out of the desert. Everything moved smoothly, and no one from the HOA said a word. At first. Then one morning, sipping coffee on site, I saw her. Platinum blonde, structured blazer, heels in gravel. She stood across the makeshift chain barrier at the edge of my land like a vulture sizing up a carcass. She didn't introduce herself at first, just stared at the steel frame of my future living room like it owed her an apology. Eventually, she crossed the chain, hands folded like a CEO firing someone before breakfast. "You must be the builder," she said, though her tone implied she meant trespasser. "I'm the owner," I corrected, not bothering to extend a hand. "And the architect." Her eyes narrowed like she'd just been told her wine was corked. "Karen Vanderbrook, president of Mesa Cielo Vista's HOA." She paused for effect. "We try to maintain a certain aesthetic integrity in the area." I smiled the way you do when someone cuts in line at the DMV and pretends not to see you. "Good to know. I'm not in your area." "Technically, no," she said, glancing toward her neighborhood like it might come to back her up. "But your property is highly visible from several of our lots. Our residents have concerns." "They're welcome to blink," I said and walked away. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. A week later, I received a thick packet in the mail from Mesa Cielo Vista HOA, unsolicited, uninvited, and laughable. It contained an invitation to join the HOA as a voluntary adjacent member, along with suggested modifications to my exterior design to harmonize with community values. It came with printed renderings of my home photoshopped to look like something from a Santa Fe pottery catalog. I ignored it. Then came the drop-bys. I'd see her car, a white Escalade that looked like it was allergic to dirt, parked suspiciously close to my line. She started bringing other people. One was introduced as an architectural consultant, another as a compliance officer. At one point, I saw her taking pictures of my porta potty, like OSHA violations might materialize if she wished hard enough. I made a point to wave every time. 2 months in, just as my roof trusses were going up, construction began next door. Not one of the existing HOA homes. A brand new project, on the lot directly adjacent to mine, within the bounds of Mesa Cielo Vista. It was her, not just her company. Not a friend. Karen Vanderbrook had purchased the lot bordering my east side and broken ground fast. And not for a modest ranch or adobe. No, this was a 3-story Mediterranean monster, complete with balconies, a turret, and, based on the framing, floor-to-ceiling windows aimed directly at mine. It looked like it was designed to loom. I ran the measurements that afternoon, using a drone, my own GPS rig, and a laser measure. Her eastern wall was going up exactly 10 inches from my property line. Not a foot, not 5, 10 inches. I stared at the footage in disbelief. It didn't look like a construction project. It looked like a flex, a middle finger in the form of engineered lumber and poured concrete. No one builds like that unless they're sending a message, and I'd just received it loud and clear. I didn't make a scene. That's not my style. I don't yell. I document. I print things. I file things. I win in silence. After confirming what I already suspected, that Karen's wall was within 10 inches of my lot line, I spent the next 48 hours compiling data. I reran the drone flights, charted the construction trajectory, and mapped the precise overhangs of the second and third story balconies. Every foot of her project pressed up against my property like it was trying to merge by force. And then there were the windows. 6 of them, huge, unobstructed, west-facing sheets of glass that looked directly into my master suite, including, because of the terrain angle, my future shower. Her roofline overhung by almost a foot. The gutter system, already roughed in, dumped rainfall downhill straight toward my foundation trench. In Arizona, we don't get much rain, but when it comes, it doesn't knock. It breaks down the door. I didn't need water erosion erasing my footings. I reported it, of course. Called in a complaint to county building inspection. I provided video, blueprints, overlays, everything short of an interpretive dance. The inspector came out, clipboard in hand, nodding along politely as I showed him the data. He took a brief walk along the property line, peeked at the survey markers, scratched something on his form, and said the words that made my blood slow. "It appears to be within their parcel. If they've got a variance, it's not your business, sir." I blinked. A variance? He nodded. Mesa Cielo Vista HOA requested a conditional architectural exception for reduced setbacks based on community density harmonization. It was granted 2 weeks ago. It's on file. Granted by who? O'Connell's office. County Development Clerk. And just like that, it clicked. Karen had seen the legal wall before it went up. She didn't try to go around it. She lobbied through it. Someone she knew had nudged a piece of paper across a desk in a sleepy county office. And boom, my privacy became a visual amenity for a 3-story palace. I didn't say anything else, just thanked him and walked him back to his truck. But I wasn't done. That evening, I began cataloging. I created folders, digital and physical, labeled everything. I built a geospatial map of her building's shadow cast at every hour between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. using solar modeling software. The shadow crossed my bedroom window by 10 a.m. and stayed there until late afternoon. I hired a drainage engineer to inspect the slope and write up the impact of her gutters dumping onto my soil. He brought moisture sensors. I installed a temporary camera on a post at the edge of my lot, angled just right. Every movement was logged. Within days, I noticed other things. A subtle decorative stone planter had appeared directly against the chain barrier, technically 2 inches on my side. A garden gnome, innocently grinning, was added the next day. A low-voltage path light followed, bright enough to burn retinas after sundown. It flicked on at 6 p.m. and stayed on all night, aimed directly into my guest room. And then came the cameras. One on the second-floor balcony, staring square into my lot. No sign, no disclosure. Just a little black dome, pointed like an eye that didn't blink. I checked my local surveillance laws and confirmed what I already knew. She was skating the edge, but still inside the legal boundary. She was testing me. Slowly, surgically. Every item, every architectural element, every decorative feature crept closer and closer across the line like a passive-aggressive military advance. Not tanks, gardenias, not soldiers, security LEDs. And the HOA newsletter. Oh, they got creative. The September issue featured a cheerful write-up about maintaining community integrity, complete with an anonymous anecdote about a non-member property where suspicious activity and non-compliance with neighborhood values had created tension. The digital version even included a zoomed-in photo of my construction site, slightly blurred but clear enough to recognize. I only knew about it because a local plumber I'd hired mentioned he heard some stuff from one of his clients in Mesa Cielo Vista. I didn't respond. I didn't knock on her door. I didn't post a rebuttal. Instead, I called an old contact from my city planning days, a guy named Harrison who specialized in zoning code enforcement and land use disputes. Hypothetical question, I said when he picked up. If a neighbor installs lighting that crosses property boundaries and creates intrusive glare into a dwelling, does that count as a nuisance under Arizona Title 33? He chuckled. Only if you have footage. Oh, I do, I said. And measurements and a spectrometer readout. A pause. Jesus, Matt, what did she do? Built a castle 10 inches from my shower. He whistled. This is going to be fun. I should have expected the meeting invitation. It came in a heavy cream envelope like a wedding invite with embossed HOA letterhead. and my name spelled in perfect cursive. Inside was a single card, minimalist and smug. Let's discuss your concerns. Thursday, noon. Mesa Cielo Vista Community Hall. No sender, no signature, just the implication that this was a courtesy, one I was lucky to receive. I showed up early, not out of respect, but recon. The community hall was laughable. Faux adobe walls, overpriced succulents, and the smell of citrus-scented control. Inside, a long mahogany table stretched beneath a framed photo of the original HOA board, all smiles and dead eyes. Karen sat at the far end, already mid-pour into a bottle of alkaline water, flanked by two men. One in a stiff gray suit with a file folder, the other in business casual smugness and expensive loafers. "Matthew," she said like we were old friends. "So glad you came." "Matt," I corrected, pulling out a chair without being invited. "This your legal cavalry?" She smiled tightly. "This is Jeremy, our counsel, and Vince, our project coordinator." "Project coordinator," I repeated, looking Vince over. "You coordinating a project 10 inches from my house, or are there more I should worry about?" Karen's smile didn't break. "We're here to find a solution that works for everyone." Jeremy opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "We'd like to offer a resolution, $50,000 in compensation for the inconvenience." I blinked. "The inconvenience of your president building a mansion in my personal space." Vince chuckled. "Let's not get dramatic. Everything's permitted. You know how the process works." Oh, I did. Better than they thought. Karen leaned forward, her voice softer. "No one wants to escalate this, Matt. Legal disputes get messy. People start digging into each other's permits, finances, affiliations. We'd prefer to handle this neighbor to neighbor, quietly." There it was. The smile, the money, the unspoken threat, all bundled into a midday chat under institutional lighting. I looked at the check. Not metaphorically, an actual printed check for $50,000 lay beside the agreement. A buyout, a payoff, like a bribe with better PR. I stood. "I think we're done." Karen sighed. "We hope to avoid drama. You built a surveillance tower with gutters on my roofline. This is the drama." I left the paper untouched and walked out. The room stayed silent, like they weren't used to someone saying no. Things got worse quickly. A few days later, I noticed something off near the edge of my lot. The trench I dug for a future French drain system was half collapsed. Not natural erosion. This was trampled, the packed earth loose and disrupted, with fresh boot prints visible in the soft dust. Someone had been walking through, stomping, possibly on purpose. Then came the fence. A brand new section of ornamental metal fencing, black powder-coated and smug as hell, appeared one morning 2 feet inside my property. Not on the line, not over it. Inside. It. No notice, no permission, no oops. Just there. I measured it twice. My markers hadn't moved. The fence was a deliberate incursion, and if that wasn't enough, I started getting strange calls, blocked numbers, silent hang-ups. A voicemail with heavy breathing and what sounded like children in the background. I checked my security footage. One night, someone walked a dog to the very edge of my lot, let it squat, and never cleaned it up. The HOA newsletter escalated too. October's issue featured a glowing piece titled "Protecting Our Children: What Parents Need to Know About Stranger Homes." An accompanying photo, fully uncensored this time, clearly showed my construction site in the background of a playground shot. It was obvious they wanted parents to associate me with danger, and it worked. I caught 2 teenagers one afternoon throwing rocks near my property line, laughing when they hit the steel siding. When I walked toward them, they bolted. Later that night, I found a note taped to my temporary site door. "We know what you're doing. Get out." Enough. I installed additional cameras. Not hidden this time. Loud, obvious, motion-triggered with visible IR lights and signage. Round-the-clock video surveillance. Prosecution guaranteed. And I started catching things. Workers from Karen's project taking smoke breaks while standing on my soil. One of them urinating behind a shrub I'd planted. Another climbing the scaffolding with a hammer, clearly aiming it toward one of my motion lights. The recordings were clean, time-stamped, unambiguous. I confronted one of them. Midday, hot sun, no room for misunderstanding. "You're standing on private property," I said. He grinned. "She told us to use the space. What are you gonna do?" "Sue her. She owns half the county." I didn't respond. Instead, I backed up the footage to 3 different cloud drives, compiled everything into a presentation deck, and called Harrison again. "Looks like the game's on," I said. He replied, "Good. Let's take the board." I stopped playing defense. You don't spend over a decade teaching developers how to sidestep zoning minefields without picking up a few tricks of your own. I danced through enough permit hearings and code violations to know that sometimes the cleanest kill comes not from screaming in court, but from letting the system hang itself with its own red tape. That's when I started building my real case, not against a neighbor, but against a machine that thought it couldn't be outplayed. Step 1 was simple: prove harm. Not emotional, not subjective, tangible, structural, legal harm. I printed 300 pages of documentation, infrared shots of glare from her floodlights, thermal imaging of night heat from her balcony fixtures, moisture migration data from my hired engineer showing roof runoff bleeding into my subgrade insulation zone, shadow overlays, privacy line intrusions, all geotagged, all time-stamped, all formatted into a punch-you-in-the-face presentation. I wasn't going to the local planning board with this. That was Karen's backyard, and I knew she'd salted the earth with favors and handshakes. I went straight to the county level, Maricopa County Zoning Appeals Board, filed under Section 211 for structural encroachment and nuisance mitigation. It wasn't flashy, but it was real, and that's when they tried to checkmate me. A notice arrived by mail, dated 1 day after my filing. It wasn't from Karen, it was from the Mesa Cielo Vista HOA directly, signed by their secretary with co-signature from a land use consultant named RJ. Renteria, who I immediately recognized as a revolving door bureaucrat with 5 titles and 0 integrity. The letter notified all impacted parties read, me, that the HOA had filed a petition to designate a thin public use corridor between lots B42 and B43, mine and Karen's. Their stated purpose: to create a protected ecological walking path that connects HOA green space to a newly proposed children's garden and promote biodiversity in our shared community. Biodiversity in the desert between 2 concrete driveways. It was bureaucratic sleight of hand, brilliant in its own way. If passed, the corridor would become a public easement, meaning I could no longer alter or expand my fence or plant barrier vegetation. Worse, any future construction on my side would require environmental review, introducing months of delay and public hearing cycles. On paper, it was just an environmental pathway. In practice, it was a legal chokehold. I didn't panic. Instead, I pulled up archived planning maps from the county's 1960s development files. Back then, this whole neighborhood was open ranch land, before Mesa Cielo Vista existed, before Karen was even born. I found a forgotten note in a dusty PDF, a utility exclusion zone originally drafted as a conditional easement, never formally retired. Then I filed a request for historical land servitude reactivation under municipal code. Took me 3 hours. Killed their corridor dead. They weren't expecting a ghost easement. 2 days later, I got a text from Harrison. Renteria just called the board clerk to scream at her. She said something about sabotage. "You're doing great." While they scrambled, I kept stacking my case. I had my drainage engineer draft a second report, this time focusing on erosion liability and potential destabilization from unpermitted runoff. A licensed surveyor double confirmed the actual setback distance, 9.5 inches, from Karen's wall to my lot line. Local zoning code required 5 feet. I didn't even have to exaggerate. Her build was so aggressive it defeated itself. And then came the best part. I hired a privacy consultant. Yeah, they exist. He worked cases involving luxury hotels, urban high-rise disputes, celebrity stalkers. He brought LiDAR scans and line-of-sight modeling. His report was devastating. Karen's third-floor windows violated all 3 criteria for residential view impact under state code: angle, duration, and functional exposure. He included an analysis of her lighting's effect on circadian disruption. I didn't even know that was a thing, but the judge would. While all this was happening, Karen didn't sit idle. One morning, I woke up to find a pamphlet taped to my construction gate. Who is Matt Collier? Really? A public concern. Inside was a poorly formatted flyer listing my name, profession, and a cherry-picked screenshot of an old interview where I criticized HOAs as decentralized tyrannies. It also included a photo of my house in mid-construction, annotated with a big red circle around my bathroom window, and the phrase, "Is this safe for our kids?" She had crossed from passive-aggressive to slanderous. That afternoon, I had a conversation with a very calm, very sharp defamation lawyer. I didn't even need to explain much, just handed him the flyer. He read it, looked up, and said, "Let's gut them." Karen's next move wasn't loud. It didn't come with lawyers or letters. It came with brightness, literally. One night around 1:30 in the morning, I woke up with the sensation that my entire house was glowing. I thought maybe lightning, maybe a transformer blew. But no, it was her lights. 4 of them mounted on her third-floor soffit, installed overnight, and aimed directly across the 10-inch no-man's land separating us. High lumen, motion-triggered, angled just so they'd wash over my master bedroom windows like a spotlight on a stage. They weren't security lights. They were punishment. The motion sensor picked up every rabbit, bird, or tumbleweed and exploded into full daylight across my bedroom wall. I recorded it. Then I measured it. Over 400 lux sustained for more than 30 seconds at a time. Enough to wake the dead, or at least wreck REM cycles. I filed a complaint with County Code Enforcement under nuisance lighting regulations. They said they'd schedule a site visit, meaning never. That's when I realized something. Karen had moved from architectural encroachment to psychological warfare. It was no longer about real estate. It was about breaking me. I didn't flinch. I submitted another documentation packet. This one focused solely on lighting trespass, invasive glare, and passive harassment. Then I designed a response. Literally, if she wanted to invade my space visually, I'd give her something to look at. I filed plans for a temporary installation on my side of the boundary, listed as reflective light mitigation panels for thermal and solar control. The drawings showed a modular structure of aluminum posts supporting polished mirrored panels angled precisely to reflect solar radiation away from my southern facade. Totally within code, completely legitimate. What the plans didn't say, but what every neighbor soon figured out, was that the panels reflected her windows perfectly. Every movement on her balconies, every smug smirk at her third-floor window, mirrored right back at her in real time. You spy, you get spied on. I erected the structure in under 2 days. It was beautiful, minimalist, geometric, almost sculptural. It looked like an art installation. I even submitted it to a local design blog under the name Refraction as Resistance. They loved it, called it a stunning use of reflective materials to question suburban hierarchy. Karen hated it. She confronted me on the property line the very next afternoon, lipstick smudged, blouse wrinkled, fury barely contained behind a saccharine smile. "You're creating a hazard," she snapped. "My children can see their own reflections from the kitchen," I nodded. "That's how mirrors work. This violates community lighting harmony standards. I'm not in your community. You can't legally direct reflective surfaces toward residential dwellings." Actually, I can. Arizona revised statutes have no such provision unless it creates measurable thermal escalation or visual harm. "Want to see the readings?" I handed her a laminated thermal scan report. I had it ready. She didn't take it. Instead, she tried a different angle. "You're making this ugly, Matt. You're turning a neighborhood into a battleground." "No," I said. "You did that the moment you built a fortress 10 inches from my toothbrush." She walked off without another word. Later that evening, I caught her husband, who I'd never officially met, walking the edge of my property with a flashlight and a tape measure. He didn't say anything, but he looked like a man trying to find a loophole with inches to spare. Around that same time, new posts started appearing on the HOA's Nextdoor feed. Anonymous, of course. Posts about hostile structures, mirrored surveillance, and aggressive personalities moving into the area. My name was never mentioned, but context wasn't exactly subtle. One post included a cropped photo of my house with the caption, "He's watching us every minute." I didn't respond. Instead, I published the specs of the mirrored structure, complete with environmental impact ratings, solar index reduction stats, and a cute little line that read, "Designed with full consideration of neighborly concerns and regional aesthetic standards." The county planning site made it public record. Anyone trying to challenge it would have to argue against energy efficiency and sustainable thermal control. Karen filed an appeal. It was denied, but she wasn't done. The next move was sneakier. The HOA filed a separate petition to amend their community development overlay. Buried in the legalese was a clause that would require visual congruity between adjacent parcels regardless of jurisdiction, meaning, if it passed, I could be forced to remove any design element not aligned with HOA norms, even though I wasn't in the HOA. It was their nuclear option. Unfortunately for her, I found it before it went to hearing. The agenda item was coded under a zoning adjustment batch, hidden in a footnote on page 12 of the monthly planning docket. I showed up at the public hearing in a clean black suit with a 15-slide PowerPoint presentation titled Zoning by Proximity, a case study in overreach. 5 minutes into my testimony, half the room was staring at Karen like she'd just proposed mandatory uniform paint colors for the entire county. The board voted 7-0 to strike the item from the record. I didn't smile, but I did nod. I'd had enough of the slow burn, the constant intrusions, the lights, the leaflets, the smear campaign. All of it was background noise now. Karen thought she could grind me down inch by inch until I either sold the land or snapped. But I don't crack. I litigate. I filed the suit on a Wednesday morning just after sunrise. My attorney, Morales, walked the packet into the Maricopa County Superior Court himself. 6 causes of action, 126 exhibits. It was a precision strike. No fluff, no bluff. Just code violations, property encroachment, and enough evidence to choke a server. Count 1, structural encroachment. Her building violated minimum setback code by 4 feet and 2 inches. Count 2, visual trespass and loss of privacy. 3rd floor windows and surveillance cameras directly exposed my living areas. Count 3, unlawful drainage discharge. Roof runoff rerouted directly onto my soil, altering natural water flow. Count 4, architectural overhang violation. Balconies extending into airspace not under her ownership. Count 5, false filings and collusion. Evidence that her permits had been expedited through personal connections with the county clerk's office using incomplete or falsified survey data. Count 6, defamation and reputational harm, based on the flyers, the HOA newsletters, the online posts, and 3 separate statements made in recorded HOA meetings. We weren't asking for the moon. Just east 2.3 million SAGR in damages, a permanent architectural servitude prohibiting cameras or open windows facing my property, mandatory removal of the illegal overhangs and drainage system, reimbursement for the drainage repair costs, and, just for flair, a public apology from the HOA to be issued in writing and emailed to every member. That same day, Morales served notice on Karen personally. According to him, she was watering succulents in designer gloves and didn't even look up when he said her name. By Friday, her legal team had responded with all the subtlety of a freight train. Their countersuit accused me of harassment, obstruction, weaponized architecture, and, my personal favorite, psychological destabilization through reflective installations. I laughed so hard I choked on my coffee. They cited my mirror panels as antagonistic structures intended to create discomfort and emotional harm. If pettiness were a legal currency, they'd be billionaires. The hearing date was set for 6 weeks later. But even before then, cracks began to show. One of Karen's former contractors, a subcontracted framer named Tyler, reached out to my attorney via email, said he wanted to clear his conscience. Morales invited him to give a statement, and Tyler delivered. He testified, on record, that Karen had instructed them to build the house as close to the line as legally survivable, and even joked that if he, meaning me, blinks, we're pouring concrete on his lawn. He also said she'd threatened to withhold payment unless they kept quiet about discrepancies in the survey markers. We now had, urgently, not a mistake, a strategy. The second break came from an environmental compliance officer who'd flagged the HOA for improper stormwater management months ago. Turns out Karen had rerouted the official runoff flow without updating any of the city's civil engineering records. She'd built a roof with no retention, dumped it on my side, and lied about it on the forms. That alone could trigger fines in the hundreds of thousands. The final nail was the geodetic survey I commissioned. This wasn't just a tape measure and walk the line operation. This was a professional mapping firm using LiDAR, photogrammetry, and historical plat overlays. The report, stamped and certified, concluded that Karen's eastern wall stood 9.5 inches from my property, far short of the required 5 feet. Her overhangs, in some places, entered my airspace. I added the updated findings to our filings. At that point, the judge scheduled a preliminary evidentiary hearing. Morales and I walked in with 2 binders and 3 video compilations. Karen came with 2 lawyers, a developer, and what I can only describe as a walking PowerPoint presentation in a suit. Their team led with style. We led with truth. The moment I played the drone footage showing water pouring from her downspouts directly into my foundation trench, the courtroom went silent. Then we queued up a clip from one of my security cameras. It showed one of her workers, middle of the day, standing on my property line, urinating behind a planter. Another showed a group of them dropping construction waste on my side. One more, Karen herself walking the line with a spray can, laughing as she drew fake survey marks during a pre-inspection. Morales turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this is not an accident. It's a campaign." Even her own lawyer looked uneasy. Then the cherry on top, we submitted a copy of the email exchange between HOA officers discussing the corridor petition and how it might pressure the architect into compliance. One line stood out like blood on white tile. "If we push hard enough, he'll fold or sue. Either way, we control the timeline." The judge didn't say much, but she did frown. Deeply. And then she ordered full trial proceedings to commence on an expedited schedule. The courthouse was packed. It was a mid-level courtroom, no marble columns, no film-worthy grandeur, but it buzzed like a murder trial. HOA members had come, whispering in designer whispers behind their masks of civic concern. Karen sat stiff in a pale blue blazer at the defense table, perfectly still, like someone who knew for the first time that control could slip. Her lawyer shuffled notes. I sat quietly with Morales, who adjusted his tie and whispered, "Let's peel the paint off this place." We did. We opened with the timeline, drone footage stitched together over months showing the encroachment, the lighting war, the overhangs growing like tumors toward my land. Then came the aerial scans, high-res LiDAR surveys that left no doubt. Her build violated setback laws by inches that weren't metaphorical, they were measurable. The judge leaned forward at the phrase, "confirmed structural airspace trespass." Then we played the worker testimonies. Tyler's statement hit hard. She said, "Don't worry about the lines. The guy's a loner, he'll cave or sue, and no one sues the HOA." When Morales asked him why he was speaking now, he just said, "Because he didn't cave. And because she never paid me either." We entered into evidence the drainage report, the photos of foundation erosion, the nighttime glare levels, and the HOA's own email chain about creating indirect regulatory friction. By the time we reached the flyer branding me a threat to children, the judge had visibly stopped taking notes. She was just staring at Karen. Her lawyers tried to respond. They called my mirrored panels malicious, claimed I weaponized architecture to reflect solar radiation into private dwellings, and even produced a psychologist to suggest that Karen had suffered community leadership trauma from dealing with my resistance. Morales objected. The judge sustained with a dry, "This is not group therapy." Then came Karen's turn. They put her on the stand. The moment she sat down, it was clear. She thought she could charm her way out. She smiled. She deflected. She blamed contractors. She talked about protecting the neighborhood experience. But Morales didn't flinch. He asked one question. "Did you, at any point, instruct your team to build as close to Mr. Collier's property as legally possible, regardless of setback risk?" She hesitated. "I may have expressed preferences." "Did you say, if he blinks, we're pouring concrete on his lawn?" Karen opened her mouth and paused. "I don't recall saying that." Morales smiled. "Then let's refresh your memory." He tapped the screen, and we played the audio clip. It wasn't high quality, likely captured by a worker's phone, but it was clear. Her voice, her tone, her words, word for word. "If he blinks, we're pouring concrete on his lawn." Dead silence. Even her attorney closed his folder. That afternoon, the judge issued her ruling. It was brief, direct, and damning. Karen and the HOA were found liable for structural encroachment and violation of local zoning ordinances, tortious interference with quiet enjoyment of neighboring property, unlawful diversion of stormwater, intentional, infliction of reputational harm. The judgment, $2,800,000 in total compensatory and punitive damages. A side. Mandatory redesign of the eastern facade of Karen's home, including removal of balconies and installation of a permanent opaque privacy barrier. A permanent injunction, banning any surveillance equipment or lighting facing my property. Reimbursement for all legal and expert expenses incurred by me. And finally, at the judge's specific order, a formal public apology from the HOA to be emailed to all residents, posted on their website, and read aloud at the next community meeting. Karen didn't speak. As the ruling was read, she stared forward, jaw locked, hands folded like a woman at a funeral, hers. After the court adjourned, a man in his 60s, well-groomed, HOA name tag still pinned to his blazer, approached me quietly outside. "She never told us it was this bad," he said. "We thought it was a boundary thing." "We didn't know she was playing dictator." I didn't reply. He nodded. "There'll be a vote next month. She won't be president after that." The scaffolding went up 3 weeks after the verdict. Not on my house, on hers. A full reconstruction order doesn't come with grace periods. The court-mandated redesign of Karen's eastern facade meant tearing down both balconies, removing all third-floor windows facing my lot, and rerouting the roof drainage system entirely. Contractors arrived in unmarked vans, heads down, working quietly like they'd been told not to make eye contact with the neighbors. Half the community watched from behind half-closed blinds. I kept working on my house. No speeches, no victory laps. Just finishing what I started. By late spring, the studio was done. High ceilings, polished concrete, south-facing windows that drank the light without spilling it. The solar system synced perfectly. My insulation held firm even in 110-degree heat. My bedroom faced the hills, not the HOA. Privacy preserved. The mirrored structure? I kept it, stripped it down, reclad it in matte black steel, and added planters with desert succulents. Functionally, it was no longer a defensive design, just part of the overall aesthetic. But people remembered. They always would. Karen, she lost more than a case. 2 weeks after the ruling, HOA members filed a petition for emergency leadership reevaluation. It passed with 81%. She was removed as president in absentia. At the next board meeting, the apology was read aloud. 12 sentences, emotionless and legalistic, but real. It acknowledged wrongdoing, slander, architectural violations, and targeted harassment. Her name was in every paragraph. The apology was also posted on the Mesa Cielo Vista website for a week. Then it disappeared, archived, technically, buried under layers of navigation. But I had screenshots. At least 4 families in the HOA sued the board after that. 2 over misuse of funds, 1 for reputational damage, 1 for unexplained fees during the legal battle. The neighborhood's image took a hit. So did their resale values. Karen didn't speak publicly again. Her house sat unfinished for months, the eastern side gutted and tarp covered. I heard through contractors that she was trying to sell, but the court order required all structural corrections before the property could be listed. No one wanted to buy a scandal. Sometimes I saw her car, parked in the garage, then gone again. But we never spoke. Then one morning, a year almost to the day after I first broke ground, I planted a sign. Small, steel, weatherproof. I bolted it to a stone pedestal at the edge of my lot, right where her eastern balcony used to loom. The text read, 10 inches of arrogance cost her millions. Think before you build. People saw it. Neighbors, contractors, delivery drivers. No one touched it. It was subtle, sharp, and permanent, just like my house. Not long after, a local reporter called, said he'd heard whispers about the HOA war in Mesa. Wanted to do a piece on the tension between property rights and HOA overreach. I agreed to one interview. Off the record, no photos. At the end of the call, he asked, "Would you do it again, knowing how insane it got?" I didn't even think about it. "Of course," I said. "I don't pick fights, but if one shows up 10 inches from my bedroom window, I'm not rolling over. I'm laying foundations."